Welcome, everyone, to Uncanny Catholic. My name is Ursula Bielski, and this is the world of the supernatural. Sorry, I've been away for a while. We're on the process of moving far away, and I've got 56 years in this neighborhood and 20 years in this apartment that I've been living in. And we also have everything from my mom's house when she passed away, several apartments in the interim. And it's just been quite a nightmare. And I've had some health issues as well. So it's been really difficult. But I'm still not going to be here regularly for probably another month. But I wanted to do this episode because it's so urgent right now. This is all the rage. And I do not want you guys to fall into the trap of this trend that's happening because it is so diabolical, so dangerous. And the possibilities inherent in this trend just boggle my mind and terrify me. Without further ado, let's get into it. 2 years ago, a longtime friend and colleague in the shadowy world of paranormal research, someone I shared investigations, late night conversations, and even a brief romance with, ended his own life. He had become, decades previously, enamored of a tiny abandoned cemetery in the forest preserves southwest of Chicago. And after years of daily visits to this site, he had become something of a ghost himself, haunting this crumbling enclave in the middle of the woods. But as the seasons and the years rolled on, his fascination with the history and the hauntings of the place gave way to a decidedly darker one. An obsession with the lights that he'd begun to see, not only twinkling in the woods at night, but in the sky above the forest and the cemetery. They seemed to him, he thought, alive. And after some time of observing them, he began to try to talk to them. Now, he was something of an electronics hobbyist and into radios and frequencies and all of that. And though I don't know exactly what he was doing because we fell out and never spoke, I can only assume that it involved, at least partially, some tinkering with those kinds of things, as well as the performance of certain rituals, and also possibly involving ingesting certain substances. He even spent time in Las Vegas, the Las Vegas desert, for this purpose, trying to hone his methods in communicating with these things. So the deeper that he went, the more that our friends watched him unravel spiritually, emotionally. And in his final conversation with a mutual friend, he confided a chilling secret. He told our friend, "I'm finally going to be with them." And on February 1st, 2023, a local news headline reported, "Man found dead in Oak Forest Preserve took his own life." And it was him. So when in recent months, I began noticing an alarming explosion of interest in what was previously a fringe pastime of actively summoning UFOs, I was understandably horrified in light of what had happened to my former friend and colleague. This practice has suddenly, very suddenly become mainstream, captivating hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of people. Even my old ghost hunting colleagues, people who had long had no interest in UFOs, are now, like my late colleague, enthusiastically embracing the phenomenon as it's known by many and wondering how they can be a part of it, how they can talk to these things as well. UFO summoning is everywhere and everything, and it's possibly the worst conceivable obsession that humanity could adopt, and I'm going to talk about that today. Science or seance. One of the groups driving this unsettling movement is a rapidly growing collective on X, formerly Twitter, called Skywatchers, founded by UFO whistleblower Jake Barber. Barber claims to have partially replicated The U.S. government's secret methodologies for actively summoning UFO phenomena. Skywatchers openly promote the use of a secret location, they say, equipped with a frequency signaling device explicitly described as a dog whistle for UFOs. So they send out these frequencies and 100% UFOs will show up. According to Barber and his followers, broadcasting precise electromagnetic frequencies reliably attracts extraterrestrial entities. His claims have quickly gone viral this week, fueling excitement among many eager to replicate these dangerous rituals. Now, I just want to add something in here that I didn't originally write. It's very possible, and this is what some people think, is that these frequencies are connected to drones, and that when these secret frequencies are sent out, it's like calling the drones, and that these could very well be government drones. They could be drones run by like government drug cartels or whatever. We don't know whose drones they are, but it's definitely a possibility. But that's rather benign, I guess, depending on whose drones you're calling. But it's all of the other things that are connected to this and what people are doing that have no idea what's out there. So let's get into it. Very disturbingly, many enthusiasts have begun casually experimenting with specific electromagnetic frequencies, often consulting artificial intelligence to find out the perfect frequencies to do this, such as ChatGPT. So they want to try to use AI to pinpoint exactly which frequencies to use to summon UFOs. And the instant I saw these people posting these queries on X to ChatGPT, chills just ran down my spine because historical parallels immediately emerged in my mind, parallels that are deeply troubling and rooted in spiritual peril. Not to mention the overt spiritual danger in asking AI how to contact unknown entities. We've talked about this, the AI Ouija board. Who knows the level to which the demonic may or already has infiltrated ChatGPT and other artificial intelligence chatbots and such to feed us information that will help us to go into communication with them or feed us information that will eat away at us spiritually. So we talked about that before. I wrote a long article about that on Substack a couple weeks ago. I'll put the link in the description here if you'd like to read that. But moving on. The people trying to use frequencies to contact UFOs and extraterrestrials reminded me instantly of the Spiricom experiments in the 1980s. In the early 1980s, paranormal researchers George W. Meek and William O'Neill, who was a psychic medium, created the Spiricom device, which operated at frequencies near 29 megacycles. There's a book about this called The Ghost of 29 Megacycles about these experiments. They claim that it facilitated real-time audible conversations with spirits of the dead, including a deceased NASA scientist, Dr. George Jeffries Mueller, which is also interesting because NASA is so occult, which we've talked about elsewhere. These eerie, static-filled recordings remain deeply unsettling today, widely accessible online as haunting evidence of their experiment. You can easily find the Spiricom recordings online. The Spiricom endeavor ended in psychological distress and spiritual confusion and even illness for many involved, demonstrating again that spiritual doors are opened through technological rituals such as these, and they can be extraordinarily difficult and sometimes impossible to close again. But the Spiricom saga is only one chapter in a much broader occult history of summoning of UFOs and its connection to the occult. Orgasm, Orgon, and the Summoning of Spacemen, Wilhelm Reich's scientific sex magic. Quote, I could see the little yellow lights over the hill again, wrote Peter Reich in his memoir, A Book of Dreams. He was a child, seated beside his father in a remote Maine field at night, watching the sky. The cloudbuster was aimed upward like a cannon. His father, Wilhelm Reich, believed they were being watched. They were up there. And Reich, using a contraption built to manipulate orgone energy, was fighting them off or calling them in. It was never quite clear. But to Peter, it was real. The machines worked, the skies responded, and the lights came. That image, the boy and his father summoning something from the stars through a mysterious sexual energy device, is as haunting as it is revealing. Peter Reich, raised in the insular world of the Orgone Institute his father had founded, grew up in an atmosphere of hypersexual mysticism, psychological experimentation, and apocalyptic tension. His father's obsession with orgasm as the gateway to cosmic healing became not just a theory, but the architecture of his childhood. Peter was his father's closest confidant, sometimes his subject, and, alarmingly, his witness. What Peter describes in A Book of Dreams is not just childhood wonder or father-son bonding. It is the deeply unsettling story of a boy enlisted into a ritualistic worldview where sexual energy, spiritual power, and extraterrestrial contact were inextricably entwined. Peter was surrounded by adults discussing orgasms as if they were holy sacraments, invited to believe that atmospheric machines powered by human libido would change the world or stop the end of it, even. There was no boundary between science and magic in Reich's home, no distinction between the paranormal and the cosmic. The father and son aimed devices into the night sky, trying to ward off or summon energy alphas, Reich's term for the UFOs he believed were draining Earth's life force. He believed these beings fed on blocked or corrupted orgone, the universal energy Reich claimed was generated most powerfully in the human orgasm. Which is to say, Reich was not a scientist, he was a magician, a sex magician. And now I've written and talked about the sex magic of Aleister Crowley and Jack Parsons elsewhere. Here on YouTube, on Substack, I've written about it, and in my book, The Devil in Dreamland. Both men openly used ritualized sex to summon entities, channel spiritual power, and attempt to manifest new eons. Parson wanted to call down a goddess and birth a magical child. Crowley designed ceremonial rites where orgasm functioned as an invocation, often imitating and inverting Catholic sacramental theology. In UFO lore, and especially in its more esoteric fringe branches, the Parsons method refers to the idea that ritual magic, particularly involving sexual energy, can be used to manifest or summon extraterrestrial or interdimensional beings, or even their craft. The theory goes something like this. Parsons may have discovered or refined a method for contact, not with distant space civilizations through radio waves or physics, but through will, sex, and ritualized energy. These two men, Crowley and Parsons, his most apt American pupil, were considered dangerous, disgusting, insane, or all of the above, but at least they were explicit about what they were doing. Reich, on the other hand, cloaked his work in this scientific jargon, but the core intention, the ritual harnessing of sexual energy to access and control non-human intelligences, was identical. His concept of orgone energy was never just a metaphor. Reich believed he had discovered the essence of life itself, a cosmic force expressed most fully through the orgasm. He called it orgastic potency, the ability of a person to completely surrender to the wave of sexual energy. In this state, he said, the person was said to be healed, opened, and renewed. Failure to achieve this state caused neurosis, cancer, war, and fascism. Reich even believed that orgone energy was visible in the atmosphere, tiny blue pulsations in the air, spiritual electricity connecting all lives. This is found a little similar to the lights in the woods that my friend was seeing, and many of the orbs and things that are reported in paranormal sites where paranormal activity has been reported, haunted locations, and so forth. And a lot of the stories that we are hearing from these UFO whistleblowers today talk about going to having UFO experiences and then going home and seeing these balls of light or these energy forms in their homes. Reich built boxes, which he called orgone accumulators, that people could sit inside to absorb this orgone energy. And he constructed these cloud busters, long tubes connected by wires and grounded in water, designed to manipulate orgone in the sky. He fired these devices at the clouds, at the horizon, at the stars, and eventually at the UFOs that came, seemingly in response to what he was doing. Now, late in his life, Wright claimed that his cloudbusters were able to repel hostile UFOs. He viewed these craft not as extraterrestrial ships in the traditional sense, but as spiritual energetic parasites. They were attracted to dead orgone, what he called DOR, or deadly orgone radiation, which he believed was produced by blocked sexuality, psychic repression, and modern technology. Reich and his assistants would go out into the fields of Maine and ritually fire orgone cannons at the sky, attempting to purify the atmosphere and banish the invaders. These were not weather experiments, they were rituals. And Reich said so himself. William Reich's 1953 book, The Murder of Christ, The Emotional Plague of Mankind, is one of his most intense, personal, and disturbing works. It's not a biography of Jesus or a religious text. Rather, it's a sprawling philosophical and psychological rant, part memoir, part cultural critique, and part spiritual manifesto, through which Reich attempts to explain how and why society destroys truth, vitality, freedom, and life itself. In Reich's system, Christ is not the historical figure of Jesus of Nazareth, but a symbol of a life force, of natural love, free love, and sexual health that society systematically represses and crucifies. For Reich, Christ represents not the historical Jesus, but a symbol of uncorrupted life energy, which of course he's called orgone energy. He saw this energy as the vital cosmic force that animates all life and believed that truly healthy human beings would live in harmony with it through emotional honesty, free sexual expression, and spiritual integrity, whatever that might be. And so the murder of Christ for Reich is not an event that happened 2,000 years ago. It's something human society reenacts over and over by destroying anyone who embodies or defends the primal life force. Society hates sexual freedom is basically what he was saying. So Jesus, in Reich's interpretation, was one of many Christ-like figures for Reich. People who lived authentically and in tune with nature and who were ultimately destroyed by society's need for repression, conformity, and control. Now, one of Reich's central ideas is the concept of the emotional plague, a kind of psycho-spiritual disease that causes people to fear and hate general emotional expression, sexual freedom, and life energy. And he believed that most of human society suffers from this plague because of our Judeo-Christian culture that we live in and responds violently to those who live freely and truthfully. According to Reich, institutions like organized religion, government, psychiatry conspire to repress this life force. And he argues that authoritarianism, war, sexual repression, and even cancer are all consequences of this emotional plague. In this context, Jesus was not murdered for theological reasons, but because he embodied life, love, and freedom, qualities Reich saw as threatening to a diseased and death-oriented culture. Reich believed that this pattern continues in every age. Society kills Christ over and over by attacking the truth tellers, the mystics, the healers, the artists, and children. The book is also deeply autobiographical. By the time he wrote The Murder of Christ, Reich felt himself to be a persecuted prophet, a misunderstood genius who had discovered a truth the world was not yet ready to accept. He identified himself with Christ in a psychological and spiritual sense, believing that just as Jesus was destroyed for living in harmony with divine life energy, he too was being destroyed by the FDA, by mainstream science, by organized religion, by psychiatry for defending orgone energy, sexual liberation, and emotional freedom. He framed his legal troubles, his social isolation, and his scientific rejection, even by Einstein, as a modern sort of crucifixion. And in Reich's view, the authorities coming after him were agents of the same emotional plague that had once killed Christ. And we see echoes of this idea in contemporary UFO summoners like Chris Bledsoe, as we'll learn in just a minute. Only the good aliens. Trevor James Constable is one of the strangest and most overlooked figures in the murky overlap between Wilhelm Reich's orgone theories, the occult revival of the 20th century, and the evolving mythos of UFO contact. A former merchant marine and aviation historian by trade, Constable began his career writing books on military history. But in the 1950s, his interests took a sharp and permanent turn after he encountered the work of Wilhelm Reich. What followed was a lifelong pursuit of what Constable believed were not spacecraft, but living beings in the sky, entities made of etheric matter, capable of being summoned and recorded under the right conditions, especially when the atmosphere and the human spirit were properly charged and aligned. Constable believed that Reich had discovered something far more than a theory of psychophysical healing. For him, Reich's orgone energy was not only real, it was the very fabric of life, spirit, and intelligence, a substance that permeated the cosmos. This energy, he believed, was the medium through which non-human intelligences could move and manifest. Orgone was the bridge between the physical and the spiritual, between the human and the alien, between inner energy and outer contact. This belief led Constable to adopt and adapt cloudbusters, those strange antenna and tube devices originally designed to manipulate the weather. Constable modified them into what he called etheric vortex generators. These were not scientific instruments in any traditional sense. They were spiritual devices. He claimed that when placed in the right environment and directed with proper emotional and psychic intent, they could summon atmospheric life forms. Not metal ships from Zeta Reticuli, but sky creatures, plasma-like, amoebic beings made of this etheric energy that fed on the orgone currents of the earth. Sometimes they were curious, sometimes benign, but they were alive and present, and he believed they responded to reverence and intention. Very important. There's no way to interpret this except as ritual. Constable, even more so than Reich, openly treated the atmosphere as sacred, the energy of life as spiritual, and the appearance of aerial intelligences as a kind of communion. Though he rarely used occult terminology, Everything about his practice, his devices, his invocations, his meditations, his use of infrared photography to see where the naked eye could not see, mirrored the structure and function of ceremonial magic. And he even spoke of the importance of the purity of the operator. Like Reich, he saw sexuality not as a private act, but as a fundamental part of this sort of cosmological hygiene. Emotional purity, sexual alignment, and the unblocking of orgone were all necessary conditions for successful summoning of these beings. Pure sex magic. Though Constable did not describe his methods as sex magic, that's exactly what they were in function. And he believed that human sexuality, properly expressed freely, that means without any constraints, contributed to the atmospheric charge that allowed these beings to appear. He saw orgasmic energy as a direct analog to etheric vitality, and that by maintaining emotional and sexual health, by having as much sex as possible, one could become a vessel for spiritual connection with non-human life. He didn't need robes or charms or magical names. His altar was the open sky, and his rite was the alignment of internal energy with cosmic flow. Not science, but magic. In his most controversial book, They Live in the Sky, Constable claimed that many UFOs were not mechanical at all, but biological, something that we've seen throughout the history of ufology, in which witnesses or experiencers, as they're known in ufology, have insisted that they felt that the spacecraft that they saw was itself alive. It was a sentient being. Constable used modified cameras, infrared film, and sometimes long exposure to photograph these beings, often showing blurry, luminous, jellyfish-like forms, the kind of things we're seeing in the stuff that's going on right now in these videos that are being shown. A lot of them show these jellyfish-like creatures. These were not hallucinations to Constable. They were spirits, life forms, interdimensional witnesses who could be beckoned with the right combination of human will and etheric charge, with the help of lots of sex, of course. Constable took Reich's theories and ran with them, not toward healing, but toward this contact. He believed that humanity was surrounded by these higher beings, not gods exactly, but intelligences existing just beyond the spectrum of ordinary perception, and he believed we could draw them down. He also warned that the same conditions which attracted benevolent beings could also invite malevolent ones. He believed that rage, perversion, whatever that might be to him, and sexual repression created dead orgone, or DOR, as Reich had termed it, which polluted the skies and called down dark parasitic entities. In that sense, Constable was more of a demonologist than most modern UFO researchers. He knew that what came down from the sky was not always friendly, and he believed that intention was everything, and that if the summoner's heart was pure and intentions well placed, only the good aliens would respond. This is obviously another manifestation, no pun intended, of the secret nonsense so rampant in our culture today, manifesting, putting out there what you want to come back to you. This foolish belief is rampant among the UFO summoners and spirit communicators of today as well. Those who say that we should imagine light energy or love surrounding us before we fire up our ghost box or start a mediumistic message session, or those who begin EVP recordings with the idiotic statement, I'm only going to allow human spirits to come through this box, as if you have any say over that. But I digress. From a Catholic perspective, Constable's work was an obvious example of ritual invocation without any kind of spiritual discernment. He was attempting to summon and commune with spirits through ritualized interaction with energy, the environment, and human sexuality, but with no prayer, no sacrament, no reference to God whatsoever. His worldview replaced heaven with the atmosphere, replaced grace with energy, and replaced liturgy with equipment. And we see this all through not only ufology, but all modern spirit communication. He was performing this invocation and intentionally opening the veil, summoning these entities, and offering up the energies of the body and the earth as signals to these beings, whatever they were. It's worth noting that while he considered himself a seeker of truth and a servant of higher forces or God, Constable never really fully recognized that the tools he was using, orgone machines, etheric photography, sexual energy, this psychic intention, were the exact same tools that had been used by occultists for centuries. The only difference is that he called it etheric physics. So again, this cloaking in scientific jargon. What magicians always do. They invent new words for old powers and pretend they've discovered something completely extraordinary. In truth, Constable was one more figure in this long chain of 20th century summoners. Reich gave him the theoretical structure, Crowley gave him the magical backbone, Parsons gave him the sky to do his research in. And like all of them, Constable eventually disappeared into the fog of his own revelations. But those ideas are still powerfully with us in these modern UFO summoning cults that we're going to talk about in a second. They're just below the surface of the UFO movement, coming ever closer into the mainstream ufology that's coming into being now, where ufology is becoming acceptable. The ritual continues, but the names have changed, but they're all calling the very same beings. I'm quite confident that there are right now people quietly experimenting with using sex to summon UFOs. It's the next logical step. We see the work of Reich and Constable through all of the modern UFO summoning cults. And there is no question that there are people in groups that are using sex to try and summon UFOs. We already have them using meditation publicly, breath work, intention setting, frequencies, electromagnetic fields, AI-generated protocols. There's absolutely no question that people are using sex to try and contact these things. The rituals are already there. Crowley and Parsons laid the groundwork. Reich built the machines. All that's left is for someone to plug them back in, and I'm confident they are. Spaceship of Fools. In contemporary ufology, Stephen Greer is probably the major figure who has propelled the practice of UFO summoning from obscurity into the mainstream. For years, Greer has promoted his CE5 protocol, an explicit method of actively summoning UFOs through meditation and collective psychic intention. I just want to mention here that it's not the original writing. CE5 stands for Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind. That comes from the classification of encounters. So Close Encounters of the First Kind is like seeing craft in the sky. Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind is actively, like the fourth kind is when you have an actual visitation. The fifth kind is actively summoning UFOs or extraterrestrials. So that's where the CE5 comes from. And Stephen Greer, I need to point out also, he is an Eastern religious type. So he's a trained metaphysical guru type person. So there's that also, just to keep in the back of your mind. Once considered strictly fringe, Greer faced growing skepticism, fraud accusations, and relentless criticism from the broader paranormal community, nearly fading entirely from relevance by last year. But just as Greer's influence appeared on the verge of collapse, a man named Chris Bledsoe emerged with his best-selling book, UFO of God, reigniting mainstream fascination with the idea of UFOs as spiritual messengers. Bledsoe's deeply religious interpretation reframed UFO encounters as encounters with divine or angelic entities, instantly giving new legitimacy to Greer's formerly ridiculed methods. Now, groups like Skywatchers, led by Jake Barber, which we'll talk more about in a moment, openly built upon these once marginalized ideas, cementing UFO summoning into the public imagination. Chris Bledsoe represents a profound and troubling turning point in this trend. His powerful personal testimony about encountering benevolent entities he identifies as divine or angelic has captivated a massive audience, spiritualizing the entire UFO summoning movement. And while Bled frames his experiences as positive and transformative, from a Catholic perspective, his practices resemble classic spiritualist seances. He calls down UFOs and he gathers groups of people around him and has become this cult-like figure with this huge following of people that also want to learn how to do this. His teachings have opened these spiritual doorways for so many people, doors the church strongly warns should remain firmly shut. And we've talked about Chris Bledsoe on this channel before and how his own church, I believe he was Pentecostal, deeply, passionately warned him against these things. And he said he left his church. And now his children, too, have left the Christian church, and they are all occultists. One of them, his son Ryan, even has his own occult YouTube channel. Reich before him, Bledsoe also presents himself as a tortured, targeted, and misunderstood victim, a prophet of the coming new age of the divine feminine that he predicts is on its way, according to these beings. But that's okay, he insists, because when the awakening comes, he will be vindicated. Now, when I was researching the devil in dreamland, the practices of Greer, Bledsoe, and others instantly reminded me of the efforts of an electronic voice phenomenon research group called the Big Circle. The group represents one of the more spiritually precarious developments in modern spirit communication with the dead. It's wrapped in this language of grief support and scientific curiosity, but the group's methodology, particularly its synchronized global EVP sessions, mirrors not only traditional occult practices, but also the growing trend of group-based UFO summoning, where participants meditate or use frequencies to call forth non-human entities from the sky. In both cases, what is marketed as communication or contact is, in fact, invocation, necromancy. But it's not actually necromancy because it's not the dead that the Big Circle is summoning. The Big Circle was inspired by a message reportedly received by Martha Copeland during an EVP session with her deceased daughter, allegedly, Kathy. So tragic. This is just tragic. In the recording, Kathy mentions the Big Circle, which was interpreted as a group of spirits on the other side collaborating to bridge the gap between the living and the dead. This led to the formation of a worldwide community of bereaved individuals, many of them parents, who began holding synchronized recording sessions in an effort to connect with their loved ones through EVP. Participants are encouraged to gather on the first and third Thursdays of each month at 8 o'clock p.m. in their respective time zones. They meditate, focus their thoughts on a deceased loved one, and record short sessions, the hope of receiving a message from the dead. The structure of the Big Circle sessions is disturbingly similar to modern CE5 UFO summoning protocols, such as those promoted by Stephen Greer and his followers. In these sessions, participants around the globe gather at the same time, meditate, raise their consciousness, as they say, and attempt to vector in extraterrestrial craft or entities using light, sound, and frequencies. Just like the Big Circle, these summoning events are synchronized globally. They rely on intention, emotional energy, and a belief that focused human attention can establish contact with non-human intelligences. Even though, of course, the Big Circle thinks they are human intelligences erroneously. There is such a deeply unsettling connection here. Both practices assume that reality responds to our rituals, that through will, meditation, frequency, or emotion, humans can reach beyond the veil and engage with spirits or entities who will speak back. And also that we can control the extent of this contact, open it when we want, close it when we want. This is not the pattern given to us by Christ or the church. We are called to trust in God's timing and providence, to pray for the dead, not to speak with them, and to resist the ancient temptation of necromancy or spiritism. That temptation has simply evolved with new tools, recording devices, frequencies, infrared lights, meditation apps, ghost boxes, but that mechanism is really just the same. In many ways, these tandem EVP sessions are global seances. The participants may not think of them that way, but the format is unmistakable. The ritual hour, the focus group, the sacred intention, the device to capture the response, the belief that those on the other side are waiting, listening, ready to speak to us. This is just how occult practices have always operated, through invitation and expectation. It was once done with candlelight and Ouija boards. It's now done with USB recorders and digital filters. But the danger is unchanged, absolutely unchanged. It's also telling that the language surrounding both Big Circle EVP work and UFO summoning is increasingly convergent. Both speak of bridges, contact, raising vibrations, and even of ascended beings. We see this all through ufology as well. It's very new age, going back to Madame Blavatsky and Theosophy, which we've talked a lot about. As I've written elsewhere, the modern UFO contact movement has stripped the supernatural from supernatural experience, only to repurpose it in new garb. The Big Circle does the same. It exchanges traditional Christian mourning and the Mass, prayers for the dead, the communion of saints, for a technological ritual aimed at hearing the departed rather than praying for their souls. In doing so, it replaces the church's spiritual discernment with emotional longing, weaponized as invocation. I'll just mention that there is a lot of overlap between UFO experience and ghost experience in the history of the paranormal, and we'll talk about this in a chapter of The Devil in Dreamland on Substack in a few weeks. The occult is always involved in this overlap, and in the book, I present many cases of this. Human spirits, over time, begin to present as extraterrestrials as weekly seance sessions continue with a certain seance group. A Ouija board encourages military officers to go AWOL to attend a UFO convention. A farm woman learns to summon aliens through automatic writing. Poltergeist activity erupts at home after agents visit Utah's UFO hotspot, Skinwalker Ranch. A famed UFO contactee discovers his alien implant facilitates communication with his dead wife. Ray Boucher, who we'll meet in next week's installment of The Devil in Dreamland, documented a group which he saw as a very definite precursor to Greer's. The group, based at the University of Indiana, was formed by a graduate student named Bill Fogarty. Two of the group members were Vietnam veterans, and all were teetotalers and drug-free. They were all interested in UFOs. The young men would go out into the fields at night and simply look for a spacecraft, attempting to signal when they saw a strange light in the sky. To their delight, they began to have some success. Not long after, however, other phenomena began to erupt. One night, while watching two UFOs moving in the air just a few feet above, the group heard strange knockings in the area around them, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps walking in the brush nearby, heavy breathing, and disembodied voices. Later, at home, one of the young men experienced incessant pounding in the walls and the shaking of his bed, and he was slapped in the face by an unseen hand. This is all what you would categorize as poltergeist activity or demonic infestation, depending on what team you're on. Then followed a sort of what they called a surveillance period when the young men would see black cars following them, and men in black clothing began appearing inside their apartments and dorm rooms. These events were accompanied by electronics malfunctioning, such as televisions switching on and off by themselves, lights flickering, and so on. And then things got even stranger when one night a member of the group said he was sleeping in his bed and woke up in the middle of a field. The young men then made a mutual decision to stop their contact attempts. Boucher recounts what happened to them next. Quote, one of the men invested heavily in weapons and joined a neo-pagan group that offered animal sacrifices to the god Odin. One became a Christian, one committed suicide, and the remaining two dropped out of college a month before they would have graduated and spent the next several years driving aimlessly around the country. The turn in fates of all but one of these promising young men and the tragic fate of my own friend, I think vividly illustrates the true spiritual reality behind the practice of UFO summoning and the obvious connection between it and attempts at spirit communication with ghosts. My friend's spiral into tragedy and the confusion and loss of control of Fogarty and his classmates mirror countless other cases appearing across social media forums and personal accounts of UFO summoning practitioners. Rather than benevolent cosmic visitors, these entities eventually and invariably reveal their true nature, manifesting confusion, terror, abandonment of Christian faith, isolation, fractured relationships, and physical and mental illness. In The Devil in Dreamland, I argue that modern fascination with UFO phenomena dangerously strips away traditional spiritual discernment. Rather than recognizing the genuine spiritual evil historically associated with summoned entities, contemporary culture secularizes every supernatural encounter, rebranding demons and spirits as misunderstood extraterrestrial or interdimensional visitors. This profound misunderstanding has made humanity dangerously vulnerable to spiritual deception. Our enlightened world has no experience of the spiritual and no knowledge of how it operates or any language to articulate it. As the practice of UFO summoning spreads rapidly, propelled by influential online groups like Skywatchers and by widespread AI-guided experimentation, humanity is approaching a profoundly dangerous crossroads. History's warnings, seen clearly in the disasters of Spiricom, Reich's tragic experiments, Constable's troubling legacy, and Crowley and Parsons' explicitly demonic rituals, are all too easily ignored by contemporary culture. But the historical lessons, coupled with centuries of Catholic teaching, warn unmistakably that deliberate summoning of entities is never spiritually neutral. My friend's death is an urgent personal warning. It's one that's been echoed by Catholic exorcists, theologians, and spiritual leaders across millennia. What's unfolding today in the UFO summoning movement is not harmless curiosity or scientific exploration. It's an ancient vehicle rewrapped for those foolish enough to get on it. And it's on a crash course for destruction. Please, my friends, don't get on this ship of fools. Thanks for being here. I'm Ursula Bialski, and I'm so glad you've been here for this episode of Uncanny Catholic. Please check the links below for links to my Substack, links to my book, and my website, World of the Supernatural. I really appreciate your support, and thanks for your patience as I get settled in my new home in the next few weeks and get back to you on a regular basis. Until then, I probably will not see you before Easter. Maybe, hopefully, maybe I will. But if I don't, I hope you have a blessed Holy Week and a glorious Easter, to enjoying life, eternal life, and a beautiful springtime in the light of the resurrection of our blessed Lord. Thanks so much. I will see you next time. Until then, remember to pray for ghosts. See ya.